Clearly, we work in public health emergency preparedness, which means every day we're ready to climb Mount Everest, whether that's in regard to our trainings and exercises, in regard to H1N1, anthrax, pandemics, or anything else that really gets thrown our way. Although I'm currently the director of the Office of EMS in the Connecticut Department of Public Health, I was the chief of public health emergency preparedness in Prince George's County, Maryland, for the last 4.5 years, and that's where the vast majority of this experience and this presentation will come from. I won't be as funny as the person who came before me, but I'll try my best. Clearly, Prince George's County sits in the National Capital Region, right up next to Washington, D.C. Sometimes I call this area Threat Central, and sometimes I call it Anthrax Alley. But either way, what you can tell is we do have a lot of challenges in regard to public health preparedness. And the nature of today's session is what comes first? Good SNS planning or good public health emergency preparedness planning? My hypothesis is that the core elements of SNS planning will lead you to a better state of public health emergency preparedness. And this is the dreaded TAR document, one of our guiding documents for mass dispensing. And one of the things that I'm going to do today is take elements of this and show you how they really apply to public health emergency preparedness. And one of the things that we see is in Section 1, it asks you about open pods and closed pods. In Prince George's County, Maryland, we had a very, very robust closed pod presence. And you'll see some of that's our mega churches, one of that's University of Maryland in College Park, and one of that is the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And what we would do is actually call on our closed pod partners for everything that we needed. Another large element of Section 1 is the writing of an emergency operations plan. And as anyone sitting here can tell you, writing the EOP, whether in regard to your state or region, it's really an easy thing, correct? Right, that's what I thought. And of course, we're talking about NIMS and ICS also in Section 1, and I sometimes jokingly refer to it as the language of the responder. But in public health emergency preparedness, we need to be able to speak that language, and our SNS planning assists us, our TAR planning assists us actually in speaking that language. One of the other elements brought out in the TAR document in Section 1 is that CRI or SNS working group. Some municipalities meet once a year to review the basics of SNS, and other municipalities are consistently meeting with their partners. But those meetings don't only apply to SNS, those meetings take it to the next level, and they apply to public health emergency preparedness as a totality. And that actually is one of our proofs. That's a vaccination clinic where we had multiple partners exercise together. So it's not just that paper planning, it's not just that SNS meeting, it's everything. And clearly when we have this person in the audience now, by the way, and clearly when we talk about the TAR, we're also talking about under Section 5, when we talk about messaging development and messaging dissemination, don't worry, you look fine, I promise. And Section 6 goes to site-specific security plans. I can't think of a more intricate area to have to interact with other entities, law enforcement entities, than developing and actually making real those site-specific security plans. When we move to Section 11 of the TAR and we're talking about our hospitals, I cannot think of a better way to teach our hospitals about our capabilities as health departments and our ESF8 responsibilities than to teach them about SNS and mass distribution and dispensing. And when we move on from Section 11 to Section 12, it's those trainings, those exercises, and the development of those that take us to the next level. It's those trainings, exercises that we talk about in Section 12, whether they're SNS related, whether they're mass dispensing related, or whether they're related to something else, that really take us from paper planning, that take us from just meetings to the next level, that take us to a real readiness. And of course, we want those exercises to be HCEP compliant. That message has been sponsored by FEMA. So let me make it very clear. The last 4 minutes of me talking hasn't really just been theoretical. It's been quite practical on a number of levels. The first level is in 2007, Prince George's County got in the 50s on its LTAR score. Last year, we got a 99%. The second level of applicability is in regard to all of the things that we've seen hit Prince George's County, and whether those are the weather emergencies we saw in 2011 and 2012, or even H1N1, we called upon our partners. We called upon those SNS partners who became PHEP partners to assist us. Now, everybody in the audience is thinking, what happens next in PHEP? What happens when our money goes away? And that's a very valid question, because I don't really have a crystal ball. I don't really know what the future is. But I can tell you that one of the things that will stand up is the collaboration, cooperation, and communication with our partners. So when we consistently reach out about SNS, and that brings us to that better state of public health emergency preparedness, it's going to actually assist us in the future. One of the things that I've heard in EMS and public health preparedness is the need to do more with less. And as I've said, I don't really know what the future holds, but I will leave you with the point of how much more can we do with how much less. Hope this has been helpful, and everyone have a great day and a great conference.